Welcome back to Lehto Files, where we try to find the truth of the unexplained. Today, we're diving into something that sparked a lot of buzz lately, the recent SAR scans of the pyramids. There's also been some wild revelations from folks like John Ramirez, if you remember him, on human hybrids. That was from several years ago. And Joe McMoneagle's CIA remote viewing of Mars a million years ago. So those have all come out lately. Our guest today is Jason Shurka. He's author of The Pyramid Code. He's founder of UNIFYDTV and UNIFYD Healing. He says the pyramids weren't tombs, but advanced energy devices tied to sacred geometry and cosmic alignments. According to your questions on X, like whether ancient tech connects to UAPs or if we're in a global awakening, it tells me that at least some of you are ready to explore this on the edges. And I secretly really enjoy looking into all these alternate theories. So let's connect some dots and see where this takes us. Thank you for being on the show, Jason. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris, for having me.
So, Jason, let's start with the pyramids. Your book claims they're more than just monuments. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit. You claim, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but you claim the pyramids weren't tombs, but actually energy devices. Can you walk us through how they worked and what kind of energy we're talking about?
Yeah. So just to clarify, the document you're talking about was not written by me. It was given to me back in 2020. So it's not my writing, but I was given the opportunity to kind of share it with the world. The man who actually wrote it kind of likes to remain anonymous. He doesn't like being in the limelight or the spotlight. So I respect that, although I want information to come out. So when he gave it to me and gave me the opportunity to share it, it resonated with me. It made a lot of sense to me based on research. And I said, let's bring this out to the world. So that happened on September 9th of 2020. So about 5 years ago. And everybody called me crazy. They're like, Jason, what are you doing? Because I come from a background of real estate. So I have nothing to do with this world in terms of my background, but it was always something that fascinated me and interested me. And a lot of people looked at me and they said, why are you going this route? Even if it's true, people are going to think you're crazy and you already like, you're good in life. You know, you got a good business, everything's going well. Why are you doing this? And I said, well, I'm not doing it for business. I'm not doing it for the money. I'm doing it because I want some information to come out that I feel can help this world be a better place, help humanity be a little bit more aware on what's going on, what our history is. So it makes a lot of claims and I stand behind them. But the good news is over the past couple of months, really, a lot of those claims came true and they came to fruition. And I always say the truth will always prevail. So even if in the short term, people think you're crazy, long term, if you're standing behind something true, it does come out. So that's what I did with the pyramids and the pyramid code specifically. And I mean, just one of the things that it says is deep underground, underneath the pyramids, there are certain chambers that nobody has found yet. And there are big basements in plural. That's the cubic structures that we're talking about that they found underneath. And within those cubic structures, you're going to find different artifacts, technologies that are there because they use those chambers to charge those technologies. Now, people looked at me and they're like, Jason, you're out of your mind. But now with what we're finding with the SAR data, that's exactly what it looks like. You see the pyramid is not just what we see above ground. It's actually primarily below ground. And you see these structures, these 648-meter cylinders, 8 of them with coils going around them, going to these boxes at the very bottom. And these boxes are the size of football fields. They're massive, massive compartments. So it makes it make a whole lot more sense when people say these are energy generators, because every energy generator needs a place to store that energy. And that's what those basements are meant for.
Are you aware of the recent Princeton breakthrough? Well, it was from Chris Chaiba, and it's not actually related to Princeton, but he was there. He's there as a scientist, but in his free time, he basically found that you can use it's like a ferrite type material, and you put it in a cylinder, and you can actually use the spin of the Earth combined with the magnetic field of the Earth. So they don't spin together; they're actually separate, and you can generate a electric charge. And Sabine Hassenfelter even made a video on it saying, for once, she said she thought it was quite compelling.
You know, the more we find out, the more we learn that we don't know. And that could definitely be a piece of it. And the reason why I say that is because when we look at all of these megalithic structures, not just the pyramids, we always see mathematical constants placed into them. We always see that they're aligned with certain constellations and stars. And that's far out for most people on this planet, at least, because they're like, you know, what does that mean? because we were never taught. We were never taught the power of astrology, not astronomy. But people call astrology a pseudoscience. They say there's no way that, planets far away can impact anything on this planet. And yet the moon is responsible for high tide and low tide. And that's almost like 300,000 or 200,000 miles away from this planet. So if the moon can do that, and we know the sun has an impact on it because of its gravitational pull that causes for the Earth to go around in our solar system, well, then what about all the other planets and their masses and their gravitational pulls? Everything plays a role and is connected to everything else. And they understood this back then when it came to the pyramids. So they thought in the same way that Nikola Tesla tried to make us think, which is in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And Nikola Tesla told us before he was no longer here, when you think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, you will understand the secrets of the universe. We do not think in that way on the collective level. We think in terms of physical only, and we forget that everything physical is made up of energy. They understood this back then, which is why they were able to tap into the exact things that you were speaking about just now, tapping into the energy of this planet and generating energy from the movement of this planet, because it moves fast at about 1,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, and I'll point viewers to Anton Petrov. He's a successful YouTuber about science, and he's made a few videos about how Mars. They've shown that there is correlation between Mars affecting Earth's tectonic plates. Actually, it's on, I believe, 2.3 million year cycles. So it aligns when I think we're closest to Mars. But there's another example of basically another planet in our solar system causing issues, so affecting our Earth. And also, there's no limit to gravity. In our current physics, there's actually no limit at all to gravity. So if you go by even our current physical models or physics models, then we are affected by everything in the universe, at least as far as we can see, I would argue, in the observable universe. So I do kind of.
It's funny because like even the words that you used just now, you said Mars causing issues. It's not really an issue. It's just an issue for us because we don't like when things move. Like an earthquake is not an issue. It's a natural thing that happens. It's an issue when we have a home that is destroyed because of the movement of those tectonic plates. So we need a filter between those two for everybody that's always thinking about these things. There's always a change in climate. There's always, I mean, look at the ice age versus now, right? Things got warmer. Were there cars back then? No, it was like 10,000 years ago. Things change all the time. It only is an issue relative to what we want and what's happening in comparison to what we want. But factually, if you look at the Earth as like a magnet, because it has an electromagnetic field, and you look at Mars as a magnet, yeah, when you move those magnets around, the energy between the magnets will shift. And that will change things on the magnets if there are things on it. So I share that just from like an objective view and a logical point of view to take out our judgment of good or bad or crazy or not, and just look at the science. Two magnets moving
Yep.
will shift what happens on each magnet. Fact.
Yeah, it's very interesting too, because if you move a magnet through an electric field, right, or even just a wire, if you move a wire through an electric field, you'll get induction. So that's really how all of our transformers work. So if you look, if the Earth is a big giant magnet, which it is, we have a north and a south pole, and we're moving through the sun's magnetic field, and the sun has an enormous magnetic field that basically defines the heliosphere. You can generate amazing currents and we see results of this in the auroras. You mentioned you're going to put out there what you think, and people call you crazy. Well, Birkeland, he was a famous scientist from Norway. And in the early 1900s, he argued for these Birkeland currents, that the auroras actually, because he lived in Norway, I guess, so he saw these currents, these auroras all the time. He argued they were from electrical connections between the Earth and the sun. And they called him crazy, right? It's just the same things they called to you. But now we call those Birkeland currents. And it's just a visual representation that the Earth is directly connected, I believe, to the sun. And arguably, we can show that through auroras electromagnetically.
Everything is connected to everything. Sometimes we just don't understand it. So like take our solar system. We just spoke about the micro, even though it sounds macro, but it's still micro. in, relation to the universe as a whole. Our solar system is then impacted by other solar systems. And then if you want to go a little more macro, which is still micro, you have the galaxy, which is its own major system, and that will be impacted by other galaxies. So it's all a game of energy. When people kind of resist that, it just shows me that we lack education on how things work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm publishing a book this summer, and the main argument in that is we live in a fractal universe. And what I found is a kind of interesting correlation. I just wanted to share with you, since you mentioned about cycles, is that there are planetary cycles that we know. They're called bond events. There's several type of them, and those happen every 1470 to 2500 years. So if you look at the cooling cycles of our planet, you can look back and it's in the ice cores, et cetera. It actually strangely aligns to 2000 years, which is very close to the astrological ages of 2160 years. Basically, if you take the precession of the Earth, it's every 25,000, like 692 years, I believe, around 26,000 years, and you divide it up by the 12 zodiacs, if you will, or astrological signs, it comes very, very close to what we can actually find from the actual cooling cycles called. And people in the audience, I'd encourage them to look up bond cycles, look into that. There's also halostet cycles that the sun actually goes through. So very interesting. When I watched through your the actual pyramid code interviews, I watched all 4 parts. Recommend people can check it out. The full series, full show on UNIFYDTV. I was very interested in the astrological ages. That's what Ray was talking about. Basically, the guy who wants to remain anonymous, and that was a main thing I felt and saw firsthand when I went to Egypt in November. That really surprised me. I just, like you said, I was never taught that. I didn't know that the Egyptians were hugely into astrological signs and ages, and that they put all of the zodiacs up on all their temples, and they linked them to each of the constellations, and they even had look like beings, coming on boats that you could determine as spaceships, and that really blew me away from Egypt, the astrological ages.
So in the pyramid code document itself, it speaks about the initiation process that each pharaoh or offspring of the pharaoh would go through, called the baraka process, which in Arabic means the purification, the blessing, essentially. That's what baraka means. And interestingly enough, one of the first aspects of their initiation process was that they had to become proficient in something called sciences, AST, meaning astrology. They needed to know that because the pyramids are based on interacting with those energies. So you have the zodiac with the 12 constellations. The pyramids work hand in hand with the energies of that. But again, most people hear that, they're like, Jason, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And again, what we're talking about is the fact that just like a planet has an energy to it, call it its gravitational pull and other characteristics that it has, certain star systems also have energies to them. And energy of this star system will be a different energy of this star system. So that's why in astrology with birth charts and things like that, that people call crazy, when you're born at a certain time in a certain location, just like high tide happens at a different time around the planet than low tide does, based on where the moon is and where the tide is actually changing on the planet. Well, again, you are also made of 70+% water. And based on where you're born, it goes beyond just the water. It will impact how energy interacts with your body and therefore how you respond and express yourself. So that's why there's a difference in a generalization. You can go a whole lot deeper between Capricorns and Cancers and Sagittarius. It's a difference in energy based on those systems and where you were literally born on this planet.
Yeah, I find it interesting that the mainstream argument, right? If you bring up astrology, people think you're insane. Basically, it's pseudoscience. But we just mentioned there physical examples how we're electrically connected, at least to the sun. We are gravitationally connected, definitely to the moon, the sun, and I just mentioned there Mars. So, and we also even in our current physics, there's no limit to gravity. So there is a physical process, direct physical process for at least elements of the stars and the other planets to interact with our
Well,
own system.
we know factually that every single planet, whether it's Pluto, Mars, Venus, whatever, every single planet has its own rotation and cycle around the sun based on its distance and gravitational pull with the sun. So that will change how it's actually moving, the speed that it's actually moving at. Now, if we accept that in astronomy, not astrology, which we do, we accept that in astronomy and we understand that as a fact, well, then what about all the other ones in between, right? So if the sun is impacting Pluto, why isn't the Earth impacting Pluto and vice versa? Why isn't Mars impacting Pluto and vice versa? Again, it comes down to our lack of awareness and understanding of how everything is interconnected. And if you look at our world today, there's a difference between reductionism and holism. Reductionism means you're an expert in each piece, but you don't know what all the pieces make in terms of the puzzle. While holism is you understand each piece, but you also understand the big picture. We right now are collectively tuned into the reductionistic perspective, and we see that in our medical system. So, for example, our medical system with pharmaceuticals and all that, they're brilliant when it comes to the pixels, meaning you want this pill for acne, create Accutane, and we're going to get rid of the acne. But they're forgetting the fact that the Accutane will damage the liver. So you're getting rid of the acne, but you're getting liver damage and liver disease along the way. That's because they're looking at points instead of how all the points actually connect. We're doing that in every aspect of our lives, including with planets. It's just a reflection of our own consciousness, which is mostly based in division as opposed to unification. That's why we see war. That's why we see murder. That's why we see corruption. It's why we see greed. It's because we genuinely, collectively, maybe not me and you, but most people are tuned into this perspective and mentality of, I am separate from you. So if I have enough food on my table and I'm rich, but you're poor and you're in poverty, I don't really care because my family is taken care of. And that's an illusion. That's the equivalent of a cell in your leg, or let's say your brain, saying, there's a cell or there's certain cells that are turning cancerous in my left foot, but it's far away from the brain. So the brain doesn't really care and it's not really going to do anything to help it. Well, guess what? Eventually the brain's going to be impacted and the body's going to die. And that's exactly what we're seeing around the world right now.
I love you brought up that analogy. I have a series on this channel about I already mentioned it, the fractal life argument. And the argument is we're actually inside of larger organisms. So the idea is that the nations is a living, breathing earth organism, and that would be why we have war essentially is the nation sees the same thing. It sees another nation as a adversary, something separate, or something to get resources from, basically like every other earth creature. We even talk about the nations as America did this or Russia did this. So I think that's a great example. And when you have cancer, it's really, we even talk about cancer cells. They're actually organisms inside the main organism, but their alignment is not aligned with the group, the overall group. So inside your body, cancer is actually very effective at living. It's very good at what it does. The problem is it's not helping you to live, right? It's not helping
Yeah.
you. Like you said, you're
It's
taking
not
care of your
compatible.
family. Yeah, you're taking care of your family, but you're not helping the other people. If you're not helping the full system, then basically you're considered a cancerous organism.
And to your point, everything is part of something bigger, and everything also has something smaller within it. And there's no limit to either side. So we are in the Earth. The Earth is in the solar system. The solar system is in the galaxy. The galaxy is in something bigger, and it keeps going, and it really never ends. I know that they say the edge of space. There's no such thing. There can't be, because energy is infinite. It can't be created or destroyed. Maybe there's an edge to the physical expression that we perceive and decode as reality,
Mm.
but there cannot be an end to something that's infinite, and therefore there cannot be a beginning to something that's infinite. So if you go in reverse, well, then we're the human body, then you have the cells, then you have the atoms, then you have the subatomic particles, Then you have the subatomic of the subatomic particles, and that's where you get into string theory, and it keeps going. It doesn't mean it ends because we stopped at string theory. It keeps going forever because the macro is the micro and the micro is the macro. So we just live relative to what we see as big and small, but that's a really, really small, infinitely small perspective of what's really going on. Because just like we have cells in our body, we are the cells in this body of planet Earth. And planet Earth is one cell in a much bigger body. And the galaxy is one cell in a much bigger body, and it keeps going. So again, we live according to this illusion of division. So it creates all these problems, but it's false. It's a lie.
That's amazing. Yeah, I may have to even may have to see if you'll write a forward even for the book, or at least a small section. Um,
Sure.
yeah, if you look at it based on what you just said there about the different scales of life, right? And I don't think the string theory is correct. I think string theory hasn't made one accurate prediction in 30 years. I think you're done as a theory if you can't make one accurate prediction. Like even your supposedly crazy theory at least made at least like you just said there was one accurate prediction. So how could everything be linked? We already said through gravity, through frequency, through light. There is an argument, I believe, about consciousness. So if you talk about conscious entities, if everything's just frequency and vibration, then could you have larger conscious entities? As in, could the planet be a conscious entity? Could the solar system actually engage in some sort of consciousness? I don't know. What is your take on that?
I don't think that there's anything that could not be conscious. Now, when I say conscious, I'm not talking about conscious in the same way that me and you are conscious. But if something has an order to it, that means it has an intelligence to it. Whether we understand that intelligence or not is a whole different story. But if there's an order to it, there's an intelligence to it. If there's an intelligence to it, there's a consciousness to it. Everything in existence has order to it. Even what we perceive as disorder, if you look deep enough, you're going to find order in the disorder. There's no such thing as disorder. It's against all the laws of the fundamental universe and how things actually work. So by that very understanding, there is nothing that can't be conscious. And for anybody that would challenge, and I've had people challenge me and they say, Jason, explain to me how everything is interconnected. And my answer is explain to me how everything isn't. And they can't.
That's
You
a great
simply
point.
can't.
Yeah, it's really how we define an object. Because take a human, for instance. A human will only survive inside this biosphere, right?
Yep.
So you're basically going to die. You need the pressure, right? You need the pressure to keep the air in your lungs. So in space, you're going to die in seconds. You need the oxygen to basically complete the electron transport chain, right? We're basically electric beings. That's why we need oxygen. It has a negative receptor, so it will accept an electron. It basically grounds you, and you need water to make that electricity happen. So you can define yourself as a human, but you're only a human because you're surrounded by the biosphere.
Like, what is a human? We got to ask ourselves that as well. What is it? Is it like, are you your body? Are you something more than that? Is there an energy that animates the body? There's the confusion lies in our definitions because our definitions are arbitrary. They're not based on anything true. They're based on our understanding. So take World War II. When did it really start? If it was surrounded around, let's say, Hitler, why didn't it start when Hitler was born? Why didn't it start when Hitler's parents conceived Hitler? Why didn't it start when his grandparents were born? When does something actually start? And the answer is it doesn't. We just need to create arbitrary points to explain a linear expression of what we experience as time. Take a book. Where does a book start? Does it start on the front cover? Because sometimes I see books and page one is 7 pages in. Because you open it and you see the copyright page, and then you see the cover page, and then you see the acknowledgments, and then you see the table of contents, and only then you get to page one. And sometimes there's a preface and a forward. So where does something start and where does something end? And the answer is fundamentally, it's one continuous event that never started and never ends. But because we experience ourselves in this physical life, we need to identify the beginning and the end of something to be able to speak about it and relate to it. because we experience ourselves as physical beings. But we know fundamentally that that's not true. And I can show you how, for example, time is an illusion. I'll prove it to you in 2 seconds. Today, I'm in Florida. In Florida, it's 12:33 p.m. Eastern time. In California, it's 9:33 a.m. Pacific time. Now, is it really 2 different times? Because that's relative to where I'm at. So let's say that there's a train that takes you all around planet Earth. And there are 3 stops in this case: California, New York, and whatever, London. London is about 5 hours ahead of here. That means it's about 8 hours ahead of California. So I just broke it down to 3 different points. Now I'm on this train and I leave California and I go to New York. Now California is in my past and New York is in my future. And when I get to New York is in my present, California is my past, and London is in my future. And when I get to London, New York and California are in my past. But what happens if I then get on a spaceship, shoot outside of this planet, and look at the entire planet from the perspective of seeing California, New York, and London all at the same time? Suddenly, what used to be my past, present, and future is now all happening in my present moment. Those points dissolve. They're just happening all at the same time, meaning it's all based on our perspective of what we're looking at something from. If you have point A and point B, you've created what's called time because you travel between here and here. But if I remove point A and point B, those 2 events are not 2 anymore. They're happening simultaneously. And I don't even know how we got onto this topic, but it's an important one for people to understand of how things actually work in this world and the illusions that we live by.
You're basically defining the object. And you said an interesting statement is that the observable universe, right? And I'd encourage my viewers, I'm not going to go into all the details right now, but if you look at the furthest we can see, right? And you multiply that by the redshift, that's the Hubble constant. It's around 72 megaparsecs. I'm sorry, 72 kilometers per megaparsec. So that's how much we see the universe supposedly expanding. And I argue it's not expanding. I argue what we're seeing is an actual redshift based on some sort of interaction with, I believe, an ether medium. The point is, we measure distance away from our planet with redshift, and that's how we know it's expanding. If you take that number, which is 72 kilometers per megaparsec, and you multiply that times the furthest we can see, right, the observable universe, which is around 4620 megaparsecs. So that's the furthest, right? So distance times the redshift is how far we can see. That number actually equals the speed of light. So every direction we look, that's how much the light is shifted, where it's redshifted. It's shifted so much at that distance that now it's equals the speed of light and we can't see it anymore, only because it's been redshifted so far. Does that make sense? So that's the
Yeah,
furthest we can
and
see.
I would even add something to it. The very fact that they're saying that the universe is expanding, my follow-up question would be expanding into what?
Yeah.
Because if it's expanding, that means it's expanding in something. Because if that's why I'm saying you can't limit something that's limitless. By the very words and explanation of the universe is expanding, it needs to expand in something to give it room to expand it. Because there's no such thing as nothing. It's that's the only thing that's an impossibility in this world. Because even if you now to get philosophical, and this is based on a Greek philosopher, his name is Parmenides. He goes into the philosophy of the word not. It can't exist because isn't still is not still is. You can't, there is no opposite to is because it needs to be in order to talk about it in the first place. So when something is expanding, it can't expand into nothing. Even the word nothing, it's no thing, not one thing, it's everything. It's expanding into something that's already infinite. But like you said, to say that that's the edge of our universe, as they say, it's a very egotistical and arrogant way of seeing the world because it assumes that we can see everything and we can't.
Well, and also it doesn't make any accurate predictions, right? The whole point of having a model is that it should be able to predict the future, right? Or what we should see. I mean, that's the whole point of a model, right? Is that this happens, so now I can predict that that will happen. But I just explained now, if you have a supposed expanding universe and you're looking back further, and that's what the James Webb Space Telescope did for us, is it looked in UV, right? So it's actually shifted more towards the red spectrum. So it should have seen younger galaxies if they were correct. It should have seen like little baby galaxies, right? But instead, what did it see? More galaxies. And that's if you're just limited because your light is being redshifted, and now your James Webb Space Telescope can see further into the red spectrum. The prediction from basically a non-expanding universe is we should expect to see fully formed galaxies. Like that's what we should see, and that is what we see, right? And but they still will not change their model. So I guess yeah, mainstream models want to get back to the sacred geometry. And I had an amazing example, but I need to look it up. So I'm gonna edit this out, but I need to find this. Okay, we talked about the planets, the solar system, and what I found out recently is in the 18th century you had what's called the Titius-Bode law, Titius-Bode law, and basically this was an empirical rule proposed by Johann Titius, and it was popularized by Johann Bode in 1766. Okay,
Right.
it suggested a pattern for planetary distances. So they had a formula: a equals zero point 0.4 plus 0.3 to the 2 to the n. Okay, and n is a integer starting with negative infinity. So basically, people can look it up if they're more interested. But what it did was for Mercury, Venus, Earth, going out all the planets, it predicted the distances in astronomical units, right? So we had Earth at 1, and then Mars is going to be at approximately 1.6. So basically, what it did is it was able to predict based on these actual intervals how each of the planets is linked. Like you mentioned earlier about how the planets go around in a certain orbit at a certain speed. And so what's amazing about this is it was able to predict the asteroid belt, so it predicted that, and it also predicted Uranus. So it predicted those. Now, where it broke down was at Neptune, right? So I was like, that's strange. So it predicted it predicted 7 planets, right? But the 8th planet and 9th, if you call Pluto a planet, it messed that up. But if you actually look at the orbits for Neptune and Pluto, they cross. So they're actually very integrated. I think they could have actually just even messed up their own units. So I just found that amazingly interesting. And I thought what it made me think of is sacred geometry. And so, like we mentioned there, can you talk about sacred geometry and how it relates to the pyramid code?
Well, the proportions, the structure of the pyramid in and of itself is a geometric shape. And as we know, even if we want to relate it to the world today and what we know about health, you need, take water as a medium, for example. For electricity and energy to run through water without, being mitigated or hindered in any way, you need the molecular formations to be coherent. You need them to be geometric. That's how those things work in order to create health in the body. So the problem today is we have a lot of distorted structures in our water and distorted structures in our body, so energy gets stuck. The pyramid, for example, is one of many different sacred geometric shapes that allows energy to move through it in a much more coherent way. Especially if you're using it as an energy generator, you want energy to move through it as seamless as possible. So it's one of the shapes that can allow energy to move through it as seamless as possible. Thus, when you're generating energy, you can generate a whole lot more and therefore store a whole lot more as well. Now, that's not to say that you can't take a structure that's a completely irrelevant and arbitrary shape and not create energy from it, but it's going to be hindered in terms of how much it can actually create based on the structure and the medium that the energy is running through itself.
It's interesting you talked about earlier. You talked about matter. Everything is energy or frequency, vibration, and about specific angles there. And
Yeah.
that made me think. De Broglie in 1923, he actually proved that the electron was not a particle. So he proved that the electron was a field, and that's what we have
Yes.
now. Is all our particles are actually fields. So matter is essentially vibration and fields. There's no particles there. And specifically, I was a material science major, so chemistry major. Any chemists out there, it's all based on angles. So you mentioned geometry and you mentioned water. Water is specifically a polar molecule. And what you'll learn in organic chemistry when you get into chemistry, it's all about angles of the bonds and how the atoms actually relate to each other on these very specific angles. And that yeah, that was what I thought initially was sacred geometry that
It's
based
all
on
about angles,
fields.
man. Like that. That's why, for example, the Great Pyramid in Egypt is 51 point whatever degrees. There's a reason for that because it moves energy in a specific way. And when energy moves in a coherent way, you get much, much greater outputs. That's also why what you're seeing behind me is in the shape of a pyramid. It's a healing modality, and the actual shape of it will only make it even more effective. That's why I turned this into a pyramid.
So that's fascinating because I wanted to shift actually into your work with TLS and how this ancient knowledge, might still be relevant today. So for those new to this, what exactly is TLS and that crazy pyramid behind you?
So there are two different things. There's the Light System as an organization, which is an organization that I work with basically to bring more awareness to the world on many different topics. That's what you're talking about with Ray and the pyramid code and all that. What this pyramid is also called the Light System technology. It's not a part of the organization anyway. Obviously, they gave me their blessing to use their name, but the purpose of this is number one, it's called the Light System because it looks like a system of lights, but it's using light in the form of like a healing modality, essentially. Now, I can't tell you that this heals you because it doesn't. Your body heals itself. This will facilitate the process. So it's using different wavelengths. As you can see, you can actually change the colors and choose different wavelengths on this that you're going to choose from intentionally to be able to target different aspects of your body. So, for example, when you go to, you choose blue and green are going to give you different aspects of what you're trying to target because the optimal frequency of your heart and your lungs is in the color that we perceive as green. So that would be green light therapy. Blue light therapy would be more so for your thyroid, communication, your throat, and so on and so forth. Whereas red would help with inflammation in the body. It would help with individuals dealing with leukemia, for example. So it's using light as a form of therapy. It's called polychromatic light therapy. Coupled with what you're actually seeing on the screen, looks like a bunch of codes, but I can change those codes into English. It may be difficult to see with this camera, but that's actually the English language with affirmations. And there are affirmations that you can program into the system based on the work of Dr. Masaru Emoto. So the pyramid, the light system in this case, the pyramid is giving you the ability to create an environment tuned to specific intentionalities that will restructure the formation of water, molecules of water in the body. And that's huge because sick people have distorted water in the body. Healthy people have coherent geometric structures of water in the body. And that's what this thing does. Helps you restructure the water in your body amongst many other aspects. So that's the light system pyramid.
So how does that tie into ancient pyramid tech?
Well, it's built after the exact proportions of the pyramids. So the proportions themselves is part of the technology because energy moves through it in a specific way to help with healing, to help expand consciousness, things like that. Beyond that, the pyramids themselves were built with the understanding of energy, frequency, vibration, and light. And this is as well. It's all built on the fundamentals of energy, frequency, vibration, and light. So it's using and emitting certain frequencies just like the pyramids did, not to the level that the Great Pyramid in Giza does, of course, but it's using the same principles and fundamentals to help the body heal itself. And again, we've seen people with children with autism that were nonverbal, able to speak again, people with back pain that were dealing with it for 20 years on heavy drugs, gone in a few days in some cases, people with eyesight that they're now reversing without having to do LASIK, people with diabetes that they no longer have, Lyme disease, all of these things are not the technology healing them. But it's the fact that the body always tries to do one thing. The body is always trying to heal itself. The question is, are you giving the body the proper environment to do so? That's part of the purpose of the ancient technologies in ancient Egypt back then. And that's what we brought to this technology as well.
So you mentioned a few specific examples there. Do you have, I guess, a clear example of how it actually helped someone? Is any of this proven with any sort of scientific studies, et cetera?
Oh, yeah, there's tons of research, thousands of testimonies as well. But I'll give you a personal one. My aunt, she had, and I say my aunt because we know she's not an actor. I know this person on a first-hand basis. She had a 13.5 centimeter cystic fibroid in her uterus. The doctor said, you got to do surgery. It might be cancer. We don't know what's going on. You got to take it out. Now, I'm not against Western medicine, but I do use it as a last resort, not the first thing. So we put her in the technology. 4 hours later, Chris, the cyst was gone. Never needed surgery, overcame it completely. Now, that's just one. But for me, I looked at that and I said, maybe it's the placebo effect. Maybe it's, her mind telling her that's going to do something and her mind made it happen, not the technology. So then my sister's dog, we found a 4 centimeter tumor in his neck. Again, the vets are like, you got to remove it. You got to put him under to do the surgery, blah, blah, blah. And I said, just put him in the technology. Let's see what happens. He slept around it for 3 nights. 3 days later, gone, never needed surgery. Now that's on a dog. We can say placebo happens on people. You cannot apply the placebo effect to an animal because I couldn't tell the little toy poodle, this is what's about to happen. Now that's just two of many, many, many examples. And that's why I stand behind it, because I see what it does firsthand.
So let's zoom out again to the cosmic picture. I guess some of the wider ideas you've touched on. Joe McMoneagle, he said the CIA asked him to remote view Mars a million years ago, and there is actual documentation that they gave him this remote viewing target. Um, do you think ancient Martian civilizations could tie to the knowledge encoded in the pyramids?
Who says that they don't have pyramids on Mars? And who says that the people that built them here didn't build them there as well? Right? There are a lot of assumptions that we like coming down to because we think we weren't advanced back then. But the very fact that pyramids were all over this planet with the same inscriptions on basically all of them show that there was some sort of interplanetary communication. And if there was interplanetary communication back then, why couldn't there be intergalactic communication? So, number one, the remote viewing that you're talking about is very real, right? We have those declassified documents. And there's a lot of people I work with, some of those remote viewers, that find bodies that are missing that, big authorities or agencies are looking for that they can't find. So my only question that we don't know the answer to is, again, who says that the same people that built it here didn't build it there? Who says the people that built it here are from here and maybe not from somewhere else? Who says that they're not from a completely different solar system and they came here because something happened over there and they needed to find a new home? All of these things are possibilities. Will we know the answer at some point? Maybe, maybe not. But what we do know is there are technologies here from a long time ago that we should start tapping into. We should start learning more of, regardless of who made it and where they came from. That's a great thing to figure out. But let's focus on the things that we could apply right now. The more we focus on actually experimenting and researching the pyramids without corrupt powers that be to stop that, because it's a threat to what they're doing in this world, the faster we'll be able to advance.
I had John Ramirez on the show a few years ago as well. He was a CIA radar analyst, and he said he was in a meeting. It was not classified. It was just off the books, and basically in the meeting, he recognized people there. High level government meeting. He said that it was. They said we had hybrids, basically hybrid species. They also said mentioned something about 75,000 years ago. I'm not sure if that number came. If it actually came, I believe Lou Elizondo mentioned it as well. But this actually sounded like it played into the pyramid code as well, where there was some sort of catastrophe on Mars. Basically, it was unlivable. I've also heard the asteroid belt was a previous planet. Law of One, for instance, says that it was Maldek, it was destroyed, etc. Is this all? Have you found this in your work?
So in the document, it speaks about four different races coming from four different planets. It didn't identify which ones, so I don't know.
Hmm.
But coming from four different planets because they had problems over there and they needed to find a new home. They were very spiritually advanced. That's why they built the things in the way that they built them with the mathematical constants and so on and so forth. And they came here in order to raise that level of spirituality here on this planet as well. The problem is, and you can actually see it in the Bible as well in the Old Testament, it says the sons of God came down from heaven and mated with the daughters of man. Now, sons of God in Hebrew is called Bnei Elohim. Bnei Elohim doesn't literally mean the sons of God. It means what they called them back then because they're these beings coming from the sky, because they're coming from somewhere else. And the people here didn't really understand what was going on, what to do. So first thing they do is say Bnei Elohim, the sons of God, because that's how they can understand it. The problem was when they mated with the daughters of man, meaning the female human being, when you have, and this is just in terms of DNA, when you have a highly advanced race mate with a very not highly advanced race, this race starts diluting their DNA. And over time, they become more and more and more diluted until they become just like the lower race. They were not supposed to mate with daughters of man, but they did. And what you saw, if you look at the pharaonic lineage, specifically the pharaohs, it started as a very positive thing. And then over time, with the interbreeding that was happening, it started changing the way that the pharaohs were treating the people. And it went from a very spiritually advanced race to slavery, killing, very bad things. And right after that, if you follow the story of the Exodus, not that I'm a religious man by any means, I just look at it as a history book. If you follow the story of the Exodus, that's when the last pharaoh, before the pharaonic lineage fell, he became very cruel. It fell down and everything changed. So, yes, I do believe that they came from other places. This technology did not only come from here. And we see it on the inscriptions on the wall with the hieroglyphics. They're literally telling you the story. It's showing you they're coming from somewhere else. It's showing you their heads be elongated skulls that are not part of, Homo sapiens. It's not a regular human being. They look like us. Nobody said an alien needs to look like this, gray thing with big eyes. Maybe they could as well, but alien just means something that's not from here. There could very well be other races that look like us that are not from here that have come here. And, the standard model of evolution tells us that it started as like amoebas and then it turned into fish and then the fish turned into a lizard and the lizard turned into a monkey and then we turned into humans. There's two problems with that. Well, one main one, if it's survival of the fittest, how did the past one that we evolved from still survive? And number two, to me, it's a lot more logical to say that diversity on this planet, in terms of the diversity of races and how we look, came from, mating of different types of races and the offspring of that, as opposed to the amoeba to the fish to the lizard to the monkey to the other one makes a lot more sense. Because how do you go from a white person to a black person? You don't. Two completely different things. An Asian will never turn into a black guy ever. I don't care what you do and how long it's going to take you. An Asian will not turn into somebody that's black unless that was in there. Now they say mutations, and I don't buy it. It makes a lot more sense on what these hieroglyphics are actually explaining, where multiple different types of races came and made it together and created more diverse offspring.
What I also think is interesting is that according to, um, I guess, archaeological records, is that humans haven't changed, right? According to human bones for 300,000 years, I believe, at least several 100,000 years. And yet we just have these giant societies in the last 5,000 is what they said. And initially they said 5,000 years based on the pyramids. And then they found Göbekli Tepe, right? And Göbekli Tepe was 10,000 BC. So almost 12,000 years ago. So pushing the record back. So if we haven't changed, humans have effectively not changed genetically in at least 100,000 years. Why is it just now? Like, why just the last 5,000 years we decide to make these civilizations? It just doesn't seem correct to me either that there wasn't a previous civilization.
Unless somebody else came from somewhere else. 100%.
Okay, and so my audience loves the nuts and bolts of UAPs and tech. So I guess let's try and bring it back home here. Do you see any overlap between like this energy-based view of the universe and the hard tech behind UAP propulsion?
Yeah, it's not all hard tech. It's connected to something called the power of thought. Now, people say, what are you talking about? That's crazy. Well, physically, according to our understanding of physics, you cannot have something traveling 10,000 miles an hour and then make a sharp left turn without it exploding and the people inside completely imploding, and splatting against the wall. It's impossible. So we need to understand, well, what is going on here that makes something like that possible? And a very big part of it, and this is spoken about in the pyramid code, it's called the power of thought, meaning the craft actually becomes an extension of the consciousness of the operator, meaning you cannot do things. For example, if our consciousness stops at the limit of the physics that we understand, we will never be able to operate the craft in that way. To be able to operate the craft in that way, we need to expand our awareness and consciousness beyond our current limitations and understandings of physics as we know it today. That's what we're talking about with these graphs, from my understanding. It's an extension of the consciousness of it's an extension of the operator's consciousness, which is at a much higher level, which completely defies our understandings today, which is why they can do things that completely defy our understandings today, because in the physical world, none of that is possible. There needs to be another dimension of something going on there that makes that possible.
Yeah, I had two thoughts there on what you said. Is that it's also them traveling through the environment. They're not creating sonic booms. So we had David Fravor. I think the most famous, I believe, case lately. David Fravor, along with at least three other witnesses, aircrew witnesses, saw the Tic Tac bolt out of there, and no sonic booms were recorded in the area. So basically, no sonic booms. And you should have seen like the air molecule, the water in the air. You should have seen some effect, right, from that sort of pressure, but there was nothing. So it's almost like the Tic Tac was not in the environment; it was outside of the actual environment.
Meaning outside of physics as we understand it.
Exactly. And the second point was Peter DiNucci. I interviewed Peter DiNucci. He was a airline pilot for many decades and basically created the safety culture that made airlines so safe, or at least a small part, or maybe a large part of it. And he on my show, he talked about an encounter he had where he was actually flying a ship. So basically, they brought him onto the ship and he touched the device, but then he flew it with his brain. So basically, he said, "How do I fly it?" Because they said, "Do you want to fly the ship?" And he said, "Of course." And so he flew it just with his consciousness. And he said they flew around the solar system. He said they went to Mars, they went to the moon. He was there, he saw the moon, and then they went to Mars, and then came back. And there was no motion at all, no feeling inside the craft. It was like he was just there, just shot there, like moving around in a computer system or something. So yeah,
Yeah.
interesting accounts.
The power of thought should never be underestimated. You could do some incredible things.
Okay, and then finally, what would you say to, I'm sure, the skeptics who would call this, metaphysics or pseudoscience?
Open your mind. It's okay if you don't believe it. My job is never to convince, right? Think of me and I think of myself as a farmer. I plant the seed, I water it every so often. I cannot force the plant to grow. That's everyone else's job. That's the plant's job. So I never expect everybody to hear everything that we're talking about here and be like, you know, they got it. They know. Because we're shattering belief systems. I get it. So all I would say is with everything, have an open mind, have an open heart, be open to different possibilities, and also always base everything that you're doing off of fact. So if you disagree with me, that's okay. But I want you to tell me why you disagree with me with your actual reasoning and not just because you were taught something else. So what I'm saying must be wrong. So there are a lot of things that I do that, for example, I'm not going to drink. There are certain things that I won't put in my body, let's say, for health purposes. Now, that's my choice. If somebody decides to put that in their body, that's okay. But I want to understand why you're doing it. I want to make sure you're coming from your own logical reasoning. Take sunscreen. I'm not putting sunscreen on my body. I just won't be in the sun for 8 hours a day, 24/7. The sun is not here to kill you. But if you do too much, yeah, you could do damage to yourself. Now, a lot of people say, you got to wear sunscreen. Okay, can you show me why? Can you tell me why you're doing it? Can you show me how the chemicals in the sunscreen that you're putting on are better than what you would be getting from the sun, and maybe just not be in the sun for too long, and so on and so forth? Now, if somebody wants to put the SPF 500, they could do it. But I want to understand why you're doing it, as opposed to, I heard on the news that the sun's going to give me cancer, so I have to put it on. That's not a respectable answer to me. But if you can share your own perspective, even if I disagree with it, I know you're coming from your own perspective. And that's it. So that's what I would recommend to everybody, right? Always challenge yourself. Even if you hear what I'm saying and you think it's crazy, ask yourself, are you resisting it because you genuinely know something and I'm wrong? Or because other belief systems were imposed upon you? And sometimes I'm wrong, right? I'm a human being. That's okay. But we got to really come back into our own power when making decisions.
You mentioned you said some interesting points at the beginning about from Greek philosophy about how something cannot exist, not exist, right? There is nothing, there can't be nothing. And I've always thought that was interesting. And I grew up as an atheist, and just in the past few years, really looking into UAPs, where I considered that, yeah, maybe there is more to the life. Maybe there is more to all this going on. And one of the thoughts that really stuck with me is, if I'm existing now, if I'm having a conscious experience, like you are, and the audience member who's watching this, thank you for watching up to the end, especially, if you're having a conscious experience and existing, and I'm doing that now as well, how can that not exist? Right? How could that, if we exist now, how could I not exist in the future? Um, so I guess for anyone watching this who wants to consider any sort of these spiritual awakenings, or consider moving forward, what would you say is the one message for them, or how could they start?
There are so many, but I would really just say it all comes down to probably the opposite of what most people think. Most people think you got to pray and meditate and blah, blah, blah. And all those things are important. But first and foremost, your body needs to be in a clean state. If your physical vessel is in a clean and clear state, it will give room for you to achieve all the levels above it. Without a clean and clear physical vessel, good luck on everything else. You could pray and meditate all you want. But the vessel that you're living your life through in this lifetime until you move on must be free, clean, and clear of any problems in order to move forward. And that's one of the biggest keys that most people don't get. So clean water, clean food, clean thoughts, everything else will follow from there. You'll start understanding things that you couldn't see before.
I can agree with that. I haven't I drank alcohol in, I don't know, 18 years or something. Had to quit again. If I didn't want to quit, but I had to. And weed as well, had to quit. Didn't want to quit, but I can say now, living like at least clean from any of those substances, etc., is, it took a little while, it took a while, but now I feel fantastic. Yeah, and the body
100%.
seems to have healed itself. Like, I did have back issues, but now I'm playing sports competitively, really enjoy it, and mentally I enjoy it, and I enjoy looking into this stuff. It does motivate me and it encourages me. I'm more optimistic about life in the future, just in general. So I guess, yeah, I'd encourage anyone watching to consider making some sort of change. You can change over time. Yeah, my perspective has totally changed, and I can say I'm happier for it.
Yeah. So long as everybody tries to be better throughout their life, one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time, 1 year at a time, just move in the right direction. Doesn't matter how fast or slow, just the trajectory in the direction matters.
Okay, well, thanks for everything you do, Jason. I know you supported Sound of Freedom. That was a very
Yes.
interesting movie. So thanks for that, and congrats on all your success on that. How can people see more of your work, and how can they follow you?
Yep. So you can find me on Instagram at the real Jason Shurka, spelled Shurka. If you do want to learn about what we're doing with these cool things with the light system pyramids, you can learn more at thelightsystems.com in plural. So that's thelightsystems.com. And if you want to go experience one of our wellness centers, you can go to UNIFYDhealing.com, spelled right like that. So UNIFYD healing.com, 500 locations, 50 countries around the world. There's definitely one close to you somewhere.
That is a lot of locations. I mean, are they like separate brick and mortar places? What are these
Yeah.
locations like?
Yeah. Each one is its own wellness center with various different types of energy-based wellness technologies and healing modalities. And we just love to see people getting better however they can. So that's why we support it.
Right. Thank you, Jason. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that discussion with Jason Shurka, Sound of Freedom producer, and his views on the pyramid. I didn't even think about the golden ratio and resonance with water. So interesting. The water resonance angle, 103.68 degrees. So close if you double the angle of the pyramid. So thanks for watching to the end. Really appreciate it. Please consider joining Patreon or becoming a YouTube member and helping to support my channel. The YouTube advertising definitely doesn't cut it. It's difficult to grow, etc. So I really appreciate it. Please hit the like button and consider subscribing if you want to get future videos like this. I think the pyramids are just an amazing modern mystery, right? There's still a huge mystery, and we're finding incredible structures underneath the whole Giza Plateau. I'll be speaking with Biondi and Grassi later this month. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.